First, I'm Lukman Abdurrauf from University of Ilorin, Nigeria. The title of my presentation, the title of my paper, which is very much in a draft, is towards an African Union Treaty on Artificial Intelligence. And the idea behind the paper is to try to see how to start to develop thoughts towards reconciling Africanness. It's a term I'm using loosely with a global technical standard. And of course, I'm trying to I'm making some sort of a bit of the emphasis on the word technical because further research after writing of the first draft has made me understand that I might probably be using the term in a wrong way. So this is briefly my outline, which I don't think I'm going to strictly follow because of the time. Briefly, I'll just give my rationale. I'll probably try to provide my thesis or my main argument in this presentation. Then I will also talk briefly on Africa in the global AI legal order. Then why transition from soft law to binding treaty, the normative and institutional components. These are sort of suggestions or some thoughts I have been developing on this component of a proposed AI treaty. Then drawing from previous works I've had, or drawing from previous works or previous discussions with regards to treaties or with regards to binding norms in this area from the African context. I try to bring in some thoughts on some of the challenges with regards to a proposed treaty. If a proposed treaty comes into place, what are some of the challenges that we are going to face, and then how we're going to overcome the challenge. Now, it's usually said that there's need, or we need to take the regulation of AI seriously. And of course, in terms of a discussion on the regulation of artificial intelligence, there's no hard and fast rule. The world is moving now to a binding treaty, of course, led by a lot of initiative from the European Union, the Council of Europe, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And we know that it is just only a matter of time before this kind of discussions arise in the African context. So the essence of my paper is not necessarily to say we need to do that now, but then we need to start thinking about such kind of issues. What should be the form that a treaty should take? Why do we need a binding treaty? What should be the form that it should take? And then how should it probably work? Just like a sort of an agenda setting research is what I do. Then with regards to the African current position on AI, this is known. We know that, of course, because of the fact that we have not really done much, or Africa has really not contributed so much in terms of research and so on, in terms of research, in terms of design, in terms of creation, or in terms of significant contribution to artificial intelligence. I'm arguing that this is one of the reasons why we have not really done so much, or this is one of the reasons why we have not really contributed so much to the governance or to the global governance of AI. And because of our uniqueness, because of our unique value, we need to start to think about how to ensure we have our norms in such a way that our unique norms could also make its way to the global plane for us to be able to then for us to be able to really lay a claim in terms of AI governance. Now, I made some arguments with regards to why we really need to move from soft law mechanism or from soft law instruments to hard law instruments. And a lot of them, we have them over and over. In fact, some of the arguments I made in that particular regard is that for us to properly encapsulate, or for us to properly be able to capture, or for us to properly be able to really embed the principles of Africanness, the principle of African value and African first, we can only do that, or one of the ways we can do this is to have a binding treaty, a treaty that will be able to really provoke, or will be able to bring in place, or will be able to get these norms. Now, with regards to the normative framework, there are quite a number of suggestions I have made on how the normative framework should take. Of course, one very important instrument that I have said, or one very important instrument, is how we could embed the principle of Africanness in the introductory provisions of this, so that it's going to guide the philosophy, it's going to guide the other provisions of the law. Of course, I made suggestions with how to embed this in the preamble of a proposed treaty. Of course, again, because I'm really picking a number of things to say, I also try to draw on the fact of the kind of structure we need for a binding treaty. Should it just be a sectoral treaty, or should it be a general purpose treaty? So on the provisions, there were suggestions on how this should really apply, and there were values that I thought that it should be really important that the principle of Africanness, which I tried to interpret in my paper, or which I tried to interpret in my draft paper, should reflect in some of the provisions. And of course, some of them, apart from trying to interpret the principle of Ubuntu, the principle of communitarianism, and how it can really reflect in terms of the design, in terms of the application of AI or of artificial intelligence. There were also arguments that were made in terms of other very important value that I think should be in one way or the other connected to the principles of Ubuntu. Take, for instance, the principle of democracy, the principle of protection of human rights. Of course, we know dignity is one very important aspect of Ubuntu. There were also suggestions with regards to the institutional framework. And of course, like I said, I drew from how it should work, what works in practice when it comes to treaties of this nature in the African context. And I made a recommendation, for an African Artificial Intelligence and Digital Ethics Commission. I tried to show how the workings of that commission should be, and of course, how that commission should also be a norm guidance institution in the context of artificial intelligence. Again, I made some discussions on how to overcome some of the potential challenges. Of course, some of the challenges that have to do with treaties in the African context has to do with issues of political will, issues of getting harmonization among divergent member states, which I argued that in terms of artificial intelligence, we may not necessarily have that disharmony among member states. In closing, I see that my time is about a few seconds off. It is very, very important that a proposed treaty embed the principles of dignity, which is an offshoot of the principle of Ubuntu, and how this should actually reflect in the provisions of the treaty were some of the things that I made suggestion for. So yes, I continue to hold this point where I emphasize this fact. We need to start thinking about the shape of a possible binding AI treaty in Africa. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I look forward to further discussions on this.